Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 3 of Whimsically Wicked, a reading duet. My name is Haley, and I am the whimsical half.
And my name is Daria, and I'm the wicked half.
Welcome to another episode of Get Swapped. This is going to be the version where I recommend Daria her very first contemporary fiction book
Yep.
because you've never read a contemporary fiction before.
Not in the sense of this, no.
Yeah, yours don't count.
Not a non-romantic contemporary fiction. We'll just say that much.
This one had a little bit of romance in it.
Sure. You can call it that.
In my world, it's a little bit of romance.
Yeah. Like I guess like people did stuff.
So, this book had a lot of prestigious language in it, and I had to look up a lot of definitions, which I find quite enjoyable when I'm reading. I like to not know words because it increases my vocabulary.
My brain doesn't, if I don't know what a word is, it replaces it with something else, or I just don't comprehend that it's even physically there. Just, the only one I saw was Jejune.
Jejune is such a good word. It's fun to say.
It is fun to say, I'll give you that. But yeah, that's the only word I actually like picked up while reading. The rest of them didn't even notice they existed.
Well, the book that I recommended Daria and the book that she read was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin.
Yep. And I will give it credit. I read it in it would have been one day, but I was traveling and I didn't want to read it on the plane because I was recording reaction videos for it. So I ended up reading it in about 2.5 days.
Which is pretty fast still.
Yeah, it's slow for me,
Right.
but relatively fast, yeah.
I do think it's interesting the speed in which we get through certain books, though, because this isn't one where you can just mindlessly get through it. You have to be paying attention and you have to pick up a lot of the language because the writing style is a little bit different. It's kind of different in that.
Yeah, it definitely for me, like I was on vacation. I read this when I was in Mexico and Abby was with me and I more than once looked at how far into the book I was and I was like, "Holy shit. I'm at 30% and I feel like I've been reading this forever." It just wasn't going anywhere quickly and I was bored.
Bored. Well, that's fair. Okay, we'll talk about it. But if you have not read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, we are going to do a little bit of a spoiler free summary and review of the book, and we're going to talk about it a bit. We'll get to some spoilers after if you have read the book, and we will go from there. So, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is a contemporary fiction with our two main characters, Sadie and Sam. They meet at a hospital when they are kids, and they have one of those relationships where when they meet, they just instantly understand each other and they click.
Hmm.
That relationship started when Sam was playing video games. Sadie came in to just hang out. She saw him playing video games, and it was just this relationship that just felt right at the time. As they grew older, for various reasons, they kind of grew apart and grew further and further apart when they got older, and they re meet when they are both in university in Boston. Sadie is going to MIT, Sam is going to Harvard. And that's kind of a gist of what this story is about. They decide to start making video games together and make a video game company. And that video game company kind of takes off, and it is the story of them creating something as they go through life together after this long time of them not being friends.
And like that I found really interesting as a concept. I work in tech. I don't work in video gaming tech because I enjoy having job stability. As much as that would be so much fun. And I play or have played. Playing now is not so much of an option because I'm so busy, but I've played a lot, like a lot of video games. The gaming PC I own has been repurposed for this podcast because it was sitting there gathering dust. But like I've built a computer, I've done a lot of the stuff they've talked about. I've done programming. I Every day is about technology for me. So I found that part of this book really, really interesting and really relatable in some ways. And I really hope the author wrote some of these characters with you hating them in mind because oh boy, do I.
Yes, and I think that is something really worth it to talk about. Most contemporary fiction that I read have a lot of these characters that are not one sided, that you're not going to cheer for the whole time, that you're not going to love every aspect of them. And personally, that's what I think is so beautiful about books like this, is that these characters feel real. They have a lot of flaws. They make a lot of decisions that maybe don't feel good for us, or they spark this dagger within us because we're like, oh, we made one of those decisions, or it hits a little bit close to home because they are such real characters. They stay in relationships that they shouldn't be staying in. They don't always have a happy ending. I think that that is what draws me to those books so much, but I also think that that's why it draws so many people away from these books.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I do appreciate a character that is dynamic, that has those sides, that makes dumb decisions and you get to like sit there and watch them. I think it wasn't so their personalities just sucked. Like they
They
just
did.
weren't good people. At least a lot of them weren't.
Yeah. And you'll find that across many contemporary fictions. This book also had an interesting sort of fantasy vibe to it, in my opinion. Did you get that as well?
A little bit, yeah. I actually really wish they'd gone into more of the game design parts of this than they did. They kind of glossed over that and focused a lot more on their relationships. And I was like, I want to hear your process. Like, what's the creative thing happening here? Because I'm also an artist and like designing things is one of my favorite things to do in the world. And they kind of like, that was really short and kind of disappointing.
Yeah. Overall, what were some of the things that you really liked about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow?
I really enjoyed the Asian American aspect of this. As an half Chinese woman who grew up in Canada that struggled in a lot of the same ways Sam did, I really related to that with him. And I think that's probably why Sam was my favorite character in this, because I was like, I understand your struggle. I understand being of two worlds. I thought that was a really interesting take on it, and how she wrote that was really cool. And as someone who's experienced a lot of that, relatable. The video game part was cool. I liked the idea of following a woman in tech through the early iterations of video games and what that world looked like, and how she had to kind of do things that maybe were not fun in order to break into that industry and really have that. I thought that was really interesting.
And this was set in late 1900s, so it was a time
Oh
where.
my god, you just
Sorry?
I hate the way you just described that. This
Oh,
took place in 1990. You know, the decade in which I was born.
the late 1900s.
I turned 30 like less than a month ago, and that really hit hard.
Back in the day. But around that time, not a ton of women were probably going to school for technology or video game creation.
And I think the author did kind of address that in the books. Like, she was one of three women in a class at any given time, if she was lucky. And that I think was super accurate to that time period, and how difficult it would have been for Sadie to like break into tech and video gaming and be someone who was gifted, but a woman in that time period.
So, on the Asian American front of this, you said that there was one quote that had really stuck with you in there.
Yes, and that quote was from Sam, and the quote is, "And as any mixed race person will tell you, to be half of two things is to be whole of nothing." And I think that was a moment reading this where it really clicked with me. I really liked that quote. I really liked the sentiment it had behind it, because I think any mixed race person will tell you that is 100% the feeling you have almost constantly. Like, you'll never be white enough to be white, but you'll never be Asian enough to be Asian. Like, I went for dim sum with my popo a couple days ago, and they tried to give me a fork. And I was like, I grew up in a Asian household. I used chopsticks before I used a fork. But I don't look Asian enough in a Chinese setting
Right.
to warrant chopsticks.
Mm-hmm.
But then I grew up in a really small town, and I experienced a lot of racism there, where people would like tell me to go home and stuff because I wasn't white enough to be white. And that was like, it's always like, you're never going to be enough of one of those to be fully in that. And this stuck with me as part of that, because like Sam's experience is so similar to what I've experienced.
That's so interesting. And how did reading that make you feel in that scenario?
It made me feel a lot closer to the book. It made me more interested in the book, and it definitely made me like Sam a lot more as a character.
So interesting. And what I was really excited to hear about your thoughts in this book, and the reason I didn't tell you a lot about the book beforehand, is that I find that there are so many different meanings that you can take from a contemporary fiction book like this. And I personally have not experienced any of those things. My whole family is very, very white. I am as white as it can get. It's hard to get paler than me. um, but it's interesting because I see those themes and I get those themes out of it. But to hear you talk about it from another front where I didn't get to go as deep into it or I didn't get to feel as much from those certain quotes is really cool and part of my favorite reasons of reading these types of books.
And I can definitely see how that would come through. Like, I think what I latched onto a lot in this book was that Asian American experience, and then secondarily, that woman in tech experience from my own life. And I can definitely see how, in this, especially in this book, you could take the parts of yourself that are reflected in it and latch onto those and read the story through that lens instead of probably the lens that you would have seen.
And one other thing that came up when it came to an Asian culture is the video game that Sam and Sadie had created had a Japanese boy in that video game
And a Japanese title.
and a Japanese
And a
title.
Japanese style of art.
Exactly. And Sam is not Japanese.
No.
And some of the interviewers, when they were talking to Sam and Sadie about the video game, they were really worried about appropriation.
Yes.
And one of the quotes that Sam had was when they asked him about it, he responded with, "The alternative to appropriation is a world in which artists only reference their own cultures," saying that it is okay for me to try to reference other cultures that might not necessarily be my own or create something that isn't necessarily from my own culture. And you saying that I can't is another form of appropriation. I think that this is bordering on a pretty thin line, but I found it a very interesting topic of conversation to have.
I agree. And this is another one where I can pull on like my artistic side where
Mm-hmm.
it's Sam has a really interesting point. If you're in North America and you're going to get a Japanese style tattoo, chances are it's not a Japanese person tattooing it on you. Like, it's likely a white guy. And he has a really valid point there of like, well, if we can only reference our own culture, like, what do I get to reference?
And also, is that really actually spreading culture and allowing other people to experience different cultures? Because when we talk about wanting to travel and experience other people's culture and understand them, I think it's an important part of that too.
Yes, and I think there is a very valid way of pulling in that kind of art and that kind of style that is not appropriative but appreciative.
And I hope that that's what, when people create things like that, try to do. And I think that that is very important to do as well.
And I think like art will never evolve if people never step out of their comfort zones. So if
Totally.
I only ever, I don't even know what culturally would be my art, to be honest. But if you never stepped outside of Japanese art, then you would never evolve your art. You would just make the same thing over and over again. And no one really likes looking at the same thing over and over again.
No, that's so sad.
Yeah.
Okay. What about some things that you struggled with this book? Spoiler free.
Sadie. Sadie's. I. You may see my commentary video before this comes out, and most of it's about how much I hate her.
So fair. She was a tough character to like.
Uh, Actually, this is both a problem and a plus for the book. The way Sadie and Dove's relationship plays out and how they bring I don't even know what counts as spoilers for this book, to be honest. I don't really understand how those work for this. So I'm going to say this, and if it's a spoiler, I'm sorry. But the way they introduce the BDSM into their relationship as someone who is active, well, not right now, but used to be active in said community, and reads
Aw.
a lot of books about that and understands quite well how that works. I struggled with the way they were doing it because I was like, that's not how that works. But I also appreciated the way the author used it to highlight how it wasn't being done properly and was abusive.
Yes. And what I found really interesting about that side of things, Sadie, first of all, not a likable character at all. I don't believe that she was meant to be. I think Sadie represents in this story what happens when you kind of let yourself get in the way of your own success.
Absolutely.
You make bad decisions and you just see this downward spiral of a character live through the consequences of her own actions. It's hard to watch, it's insufferable. Having internal thoughts by her is literally painful.
I think anytime we were shifting over to her, I was like, not again. What's she gonna do now? Who's she gonna screw over while she drinks her whole life into a train wreck?
Yes.
Yeah, that was hard to read.
And on the BDSM side of things, I took this a few ways. I think, first of all, her whole motivation for it had absolutely nothing to do with intimacy and sex, which I think is probably part of the issue here. And I also think that the author, again, did a really good job at making sure that we understood that it was not a healthy relationship and things like that. I don't think that this is a spoiler. But with that being said, it did also move the story along, in my opinion, in a way that she was doing it for other reasons. When she was doing it, I think this is one of those examples where she made a decision that we as the readers know was bad for her mental health, was clearly abusive. I think she, as the character, knew that it was abusive, but did it anyways because it was going to further her career and her video game and her knowledge and all of those things. And her doing that is really hard as a reader to watch.
And I think I referenced that earlier as one of the points of like the things she had to do to make it in the world of tech as a woman to make sure that her career could survive being a woman.
I think that's a great representation of that, actually. Great call.
And like I assume that's where the author was going with this. That's where I took it.
No, I think you're completely bang on there with that. You mentioned that you love video games, that you've always played video games, maybe not recently. How did you find the representation of video games in this novel? How did it contribute to your enjoyment?
I kind of wish they did more on the video games, to be honest. The video games felt like an afterthought the whole way through, and the focus was much more on like the dynamics between the characters, because like the video games they were making were interesting for the time period and the style of video game they were trying to make, because I was like, you could do more advanced things than this at this time. Like Doom had come out by now, and you could have been doing
Mm.
much more interactive. And there's a whole narrative on first person shooters in that. I'm not diving into that whole thing, but like what they were doing, like I found their video games really juvenile and underdeveloped. And I did Google the author a little bit to see if she had any background in video gaming or the video gaming industry at all, and I didn't see anything that indicated that, but I could be wrong.
I think that's interesting because, as somebody who does not play a lot of video games, not for the lack of trying, I would love to be really good at video games, but I tried to play the new Spider Man the other day on the PS5, and Spider Man cannot drown in this video game. I sure as hell tried my best. I suck at video games, and so just I've never really been able to get into video games that much. I thought the video games were vaguely interesting. I liked the concept of them. I liked the idea of the video game that they ended up creating. However, they didn't go in depth enough, but I didn't need that. So I can see where it would have been missing for you.
It was also interesting too because I could tell which video games she was pulling from for some of the inspiration for them.
Oh.
And I was like, yeah, sure, I guess.
Okay, well, I want to continue to talk about the video games. I think we need to go into spoilers though.
Sounds good. This is your official warning. If you have not read it tomorrow, and you don't want to be spoiled, pause us, read it, and come back. If you already have or you don't care, keep listening.
Sadie had created her very first or second video game, the first really impactful one, at her time at MIT, and it was called Solution.
Yeah.
Eventually, we find out that the purpose of the game is for you to be making swastikas for Hitler in the Holocaust. The purpose of the game was for you to go slow enough that nobody would notice, but you would vaguely sabotage the whole system, and that's how you would win. It was very strategic.
Yeah.
What did you think of this?
I thought it was really cool. I thought the concept was actually, out of all the games they made, the best one. Because the idea of, and like this is something you go through every day in life. Like you could be supporting, and it happens in the book world all the time, someone who you don't actually align with, and unknowingly are like buying their products, buying their books, and you realize that like maybe they do stand for something you don't like, and then you stop. Versus this one has like real world consequences of you will likely be dealt with extremely if you're caught. And I just thought it was a really cool narrative on like the human experience and how you have to make hard choices and decisions you have to make. And sometimes in this case for a war, like your life is on the line.
Yes, and it actually for me added a lot of layers to Sadie as a character because it gave her a little bit more depth in terms of she's kind of a genius a little bit,
Yeah, no, I no doubt Sadie is a gifted human for sure. Does she use that gift well? No.
which is so interesting because in this game, the whole purpose is for you to understand the implications of your actions and make the best decisions to be the best human that you can. And yet, she does not have enough perspective or self awareness to do that with herself.
No, but she understands the concept of it, which is crazy.
It's super ironic. And I think that that is what makes that character so good, even though we do not like her.
No, not even a little bit.
The other thing that actually comes from this book that I think is an interesting theme that I took away from it was that this idea, sorry, was this idea of do-overs in life. Because in
Yes.
video games, Sam and Sadie, and even Marks, their third partner, who was Sam's roommate, who ended up being the producer of their video game company, they really used video games as this form of escape. And in that escape, what they loved so much about it was the strategy of if I die, if I lose this game, I can just try again with a new strategy. And that doesn't really move over to life very well.
No. And I think it's definitely one of the draws of video games. A lot of the video games I play are role play games. So you can go through the same game an endless number of times and make different choices and have different outcomes. You can die, you can come back to life, you can do all of these things that aren't possible in real life. And I think that's one of the biggest draws of video games is the fact that you can live 100 lives in one game.
And when we talk about our own decision making in real life, like being an adult is really hard.
Yeah.
And we have to make a lot of really challenging decisions without knowing where it's going to go. Getting into a video game where you get to make a decision with almost no consequences is really attractive to most of us. And then also, we get to redo and we get to re-decide and re strategize about how we're going to be successful in the future.
Yeah. And I think that's just such a big draw for a lot of people and a lot of people who like maybe you don't have the social skills or the ability to do all that stuff in real life so you get to go do it in a game.
But part of the conversation that I think that this furthers is that life does not have do-overs, and this escapism can also be really dangerous, even though it can be healthy at times. So when Sadie, for example, Sadie experienced a lot of depression during her time in this book. When her and Dove broke up, she went into a crazy depression, and also when Marks died.
Yeah.
Both of those times, her coping mechanisms, let's be real, they sucked.
Oh yeah.
And that was probably some of the hardest chapters that I had to suffer through with her because that's when I liked her the least, which says probably just as much about me as it does about the book in general.
I think it's interesting because I think I disliked Sadie the most when she wasn't depressed and she was choosing to be that horrible of a person to Sam just for the sake of it.
She really did do that a lot.
Like, yeah, because when she's depressed, I can be like, I understand why you're upset. I understand it's really hard to get through that, and I can relate to that. Like, that makes sense to me. But, like, 5 years after, you're no longer depressed and you're still blaming Sam for all of your problems. That's shitty. Or even, like, post Dove, when she, like, kept accusing Sam of trying to use her and steal her ideas and, like, all of this stuff. I was like, why? What did Sam ever do? And then you switch to Sam's perspective, and he's like, I'm just trying to support her. What's the best way we can do this? Do you think she has an idea about how we can get this done together? And then you switch to Sadie, and she's like, fuck Sam. He's stealing my ideas.
Yeah, they had such a crazy relationship. And when Sadie got super depressed, she used video games as such a form of escapism and this idea that I can control everything in this aspect and I don't have to go into real life because I can just sit in here and I don't have to worry about Sam. I can push him away as much as I possibly want and I don't have to talk to anybody and I can just live in these stories that I've created. And I think that there's such a conversation to be had about the lack of accountability that we really have in our lives to make sure that we don't go down that spiral, to make sure that we do come out of that escapism when we need it and can be really healthy, but there is a line that we cross sometimes with that.
For sure.
But I think that there is a conversation to be had because I think what prevents a lot of us from doing that is the people around us. And that is what Sam tried so hard to do with Sadie.
And Sadie just was never going to be the kind of person who was going to be better.
I really think that they were so awful for each other.
Yeah.
And when it comes to these types of relationships, I would consider it non romantic. I think that Sam had asexual undertones. I don't know that that's confirmed.
Oh, reading it, definitely, my brain was like, oh, okay, he's just not into this, which is okay, fair.
Yeah. And he always had very clear feelings for Sadie. Sadie's actions did not warrant any sort of healthy relationship, but I also think Sam didn't either. They really played off of each other in a way where they just never knew how to support each other.
No, they could never meet in the middle.
No. And it's such an interesting thing because for them, it really kind of was love at first sight. Maybe not romantic love, they were very young, but they just clicked so instantly. I have only ever felt that way in my life, maybe two or three times, where I've just met someone and said, we are either going to be so perfect for each other or so bad for each other. It doesn't happen for me very often. I don't think it happens for people in general very often.
No.
And when it does, I truly believe that it's our decisions that make or break that relationship.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And in this case, their decisions broke that.
Yes, because when you feel that type of connection or that type of love, I think it's so easy to ignore everything else that you are responsible for in a relationship, such as respect, such as love, such as consideration, empathy, and things like that, because the expectations are none. You just connect. You don't have to try with that other person. I think that there's something to be said for you do have to try in the relationships that you have. You do have to put an effort. You do have to show each other respect. And when you feel a connection that way, I've seen it happen in my own life. I've seen it happen in the people I love's life. I've seen it happen in those I love lives where if you do not keep each other accountable for that, things just will fall apart.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest themes of this book was not having accountability for one's actions.
100%.
Like their parents didn't keep them accountable to anything, especially Sadie's.
Yeah.
And then their friends definitely didn't. Their romantic partners sure didn't. It was just a long string of not being accountable for one's own actions, making really shitty decisions, hurting everyone around you, and then leaving.
And there's also a risk with that because they created this video game together. They were creating something extraordinary. I love this idea of creating something extraordinary together, and the way that that clashed with their personal lives did not bode well.
Yeah.
They constantly their priorities for each other were always on battle. It was either I really care for Sadie and I care for Sadie more as a person, or I care for the video games more. Sam always had this idea that he wanted to be famous, he wanted to matter, he wanted to create a really great video game. And there were times throughout that novel where Sam cared a hell of a lot more about that than he did about Sadie.
Absolutely. And he was very single minded at every given moment in that book, but for different things all the time.
Yes, and I do think that Sadie had a right to be resentful for a lot of those scenarios
Yes, but I also think communication is a thing that exists, and she could have talked to him about it.
instead of screaming at him and blaming him for all of her misfortune.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because I think Sam does try to talk to her a lot more than she does to him.
100% he does.
Like he was the one who was always reaching out with an olive branch, being like, "Hey, like I understand, I messed up, and like let's talk about it." And then she'd be like, "No," and then not
Yes.
speak to him for like 3 years
So dramatic.
for fun. Like I couldn't. If I don't speak to one of my friends for that long, we're no longer friends.
I don't think we could go that long without speaking to each other. One of us would blow up.
Yeah.
Last thing that I want to talk about with this book is how Sam tried to get through to Sadie after Marks had died
Mm.
through the creation of a video game that he got her hooked on. What did you think of this?
I thought that was cute.
Okay.
I thought that was an impressive amount of effort to try to get someone to talk to you. I can't imagine caring about anyone quite that much.
Same.
Like knowing what it takes to program a video game, because I've done super rudimentary like Pong style programming, and that took forever. There's no way.
You know what? I take it back. I can picture caring about someone that much. What I can't understand is how he felt that Sadie deserved that much care and attention to try and get her out of that state she was in.
That too. Like, okay, I take it back. I do care about people a lot. To invest what, and we'll touch on this after I make this statement. To invest that much time and effort into building a video game to then get someone to like speak to you in any way, shape, or form, absolutely not. But you know me, I'm a really big believer in like I give relationships what they give me. I don't. I'm not the kind of person who's gonna go above and beyond all the time and like carry a relationship. Like if someone's not gonna reciprocate, I'm not giving them my time, effort, and mental health.
I'm trying to figure out if we differ in that.
I think we've talked about this a lot too, like in the car and stuff.
Unrequited love is such an interesting trope, and I don't think that this was intentional unrequited love. I think Sadie did love Sam in every way that Sadie knew how. I don't think that she was able to handle it.
If I was to armchair diagnose Sadie, it would be as a narcissist.
Oh, yeah.
So narcissistic.
I'm all for armchair diagnosing
Fictional characters?
fictional characters
Yeah.
on this podcast.
Sadie's a narcissist, to say the least.
It is really sad because I thought what Sam did was so cute and so intentional, and I think it also shows that people can be selfless and care for somebody more than they know that that other person is willing to care for them or able to care for them. The fact that Sam was never reciprocated in Sadie's love, she married his best friend, had a baby with his best
Oh,
friend,
we're going to talk about that in a second too.
and then still found it in his heart to understand that original connection that they had and original love and saw Sadie as a special human being really got to me because Sadie did make so many poor decisions. She really went so haywire. She went so haywire with where her life could have gone and the type of person she could have been. And Sam was able to still strip her of all of those things and see her as somebody worthy of love. I thought that that was very special.
I could not relate to it in any way, shape, or form. I was like, dude, give up, find a lawyer, get her off the title, call it a day.
Fuck her.
There you go. On the note, though, one of the reasons why I Googled if this author had ever done anything in the video gaming industry is the timelines she had for them making these games were insane.
Oh.
They were so short. I was like, there's no way you're pushing out games like this without, especially in the early iterations of it, without a massive studio backing you to get this done. I don't care how many sleepless nights you had. Games take years to develop. The only reason EA shits out another hockey game or NBA game every year is because they have a massive number of employees. And let's be real, they take the same game they released the previous year, upgrade a couple things, and pop it back out. There's no way you're designing net new games like this in a year. That's not, and especially in the early days when they were like the 5 of them. That's not happening.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I could just learn how to create a video game and then pump one out in the next 5 months.
Yeah, like it was crazy. So that was one of my big gripes with it, where it kept pulling me out. It was like, this is unrealistic. I can't handle this. Something else that I found.
Sorry. Says the person who had a man implant a birth control chip with a tracker in it in one of her books.
Hey now, that technology's real and can be done. My dog has a GPS tracker on it.
Yeah, so can your girlfriend, apparently.
Honestly, if someone wanted to keep track of me, they probably have to. I'm not usually present. I'm all over the place, and it ain't Edmonton. The other thing that I hated, and somehow I've managed to talk about this more than once on TikTok. My policy in life is don't shit where you eat. which means don't date your fucking coworkers. If you have to go somewhere and earn your livelihood in the same place as your ex, don't date them because you ain't gonna last. You're gonna break up, and then you're gonna have to find either a new job or everything's gonna be hella awkward. Or he's gonna get murdered in your workplace and you won't be able to go back and go into a depressive spiral while pregnant with his child and somehow still get to be part of that company because the other partner really likes you for some reason, even though you're a massive bitch. Or he's gonna do pseudo rape shit through BDSM to you, and you're gonna have to take it because you're relying on him for something, and that's the choice you made.
Yeah, Sadie really did keep dating her coworkers or
Yeah,
professors.
constantly.
You've given me this advice about the gym, though, too.
Yeah, I have, and you still haven't listened to me, and it's still a problem.
I haven't dated someone from the gym in a month and a half.
Wow. I'm so impressed. Good job.
There was the Dungeons and Dragons situation, though, too, and that was about a week and a half ago, so.
Think that still counts as shitting where you eat? Because you
I
can't
need-
just drop out of your D&D campaign. Like, you could, but you would be a horrible human.
Yeah, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. But now
We're all adults.
you have to go have awkward D&D time now with a dude you told you weren't interested in.
My Dragonborn is a badass woman who don't care about that stuff.
How's your anxiety when you go?
My anxiety is doing great, thank you for asking. I have zero anxiety.
Uh-huh.
What did you rate tomorrow times 3?
So, I struggled with this. I was debating quite heavily between a 2.5 and a 3 stars. Leaning more towards the 3 because I will give it credit. It was well written. I could read it in a day, which I always appreciate in a book. It was not very long, despite the fact it felt like it went on forever and ever and ever. So I think I'm going to give it 3 stars. It did make me think. I really liked Sam as a character in the human sense of I could relate to him really well. I understood his struggles in life. I thought he was cool. Made some really dumb decisions along the way, but like, hey, don't we all? At least his dumb decisions I could relate to in a way. Where like you just get too lost in your work, or I forget to eat constantly. Like those kinds of things, I get that. Sometimes you forget people. If you're an introvert, like he seems to be, like I understand that. So I think I really like Sam. I really liked Marks until, he wasn't there anymore. That was a little sad. So I'm settling on a 3 because I actually think it was really well written. I read the whole book. I didn't DNF it, which wasn't really an option because I was doing this with it. But I would have finished it because I think it kept me interested long enough. And I enjoyed the woman in tech aspect, even if I really hate Sadie. I think she's a narcissist and a really poor representation of women in tech.
What I did find interesting, because we've both done a book swap now, I found it really, really hard to land on a rating for Butcher and Blackbird when I did it too.
Yeah. For context, my rating scale is mostly on vibe. Like, as a dyslexic person, writing style, so long as I can comprehend what's happening, my brain's going to fill in the blanks for me. I don't really care how well written your book is, what language you're using. I'll be fine. I care more about the emotions and the feelings that they evoke for me and, like, how I enjoy that aspect. Is it really funny? Is it crazy? Are these men doing stupid things? Is this woman really powerful? Like, what is this doing? Whereas with this book, I'm rating it more on I read it all. Win. I didn't hate the whole thing. Also a win. I did think, like, if I wasn't dyslexic, really well written. My brain did gloss over a lot of words, not gonna lie. I think if I went through and reread that, I would pick up a lot more stuff the second time around, because the first time around I'm just not going to.
Right. And it is so interesting because you rate primarily on the vibes, the amount that you enjoyed it, which I think you have to do for a lot of those romance novels and those dark romance, because that's what they're there for. You're having fun, you're having a good time, you're going to get a little turned on, you're going to enjoy the ridiculous stories that it gives. Where when I read contemporary fiction, I'm looking at the writing style. I'm looking about the way that it made me feel really deeply about the world, or think about certain morals, think about the way that I see the world. I am rating it based on, did it actually change my perspective on the world, which is, I imagine, very different than what you would experience with dark romance novels.
Yes. Especially if you're not, like, already part of a kink community or interested or participating in kink, there's not a lot that's going to really, like, shift your dynamics in the world. Like this dark academia isn't going to magically make you think about university differently because the angry god that requires souls underneath the university is doing something a little interesting. Like that's not really what it's there for. It's there to be escape, just like the video games. It's escapism, I think, at the end of the day. Like I'm there because I would otherwise be staring at a wall. I don't know.
Right. And how effective was that escapism? How
Yeah.
much fun did you just get to spend 3 hours of your day having?
Did it pull me in? Did I enjoy the characters? Was the story interesting? Was it at least somewhat unique? Sometimes I don't need it to be unique. I'm pretty happy with cookie cutter most of the time too. Let's be real. Did I laugh? Oh my gosh. Some of these dark romances, they're just so unhinged. I laugh the whole time. It's
Right.
hilarious.
And that's so different than what a contemporary fiction gives you. But that was the exact same experience I had with Butcher and Blackbird, except for the opposite way, because I was looking at it from a wow, they've said the same word so many times, or I swear to God, I don't understand why somebody is moaning because somebody is grating cheese. There were so many things that really took me out of it. I wasn't just allowing myself to escape and have a good time. I was really getting granular about the writing style and about how the characters were developing and did I believe what the characters were doing. But I was looking at it from a perspective of how I would rate a contemporary fiction or a high fantasy novel or something written in the 1800s by a Russian novelist who had really crazy and profound thoughts. And they're just different books. And I almost had to have a different rating system for it. Otherwise, it wasn't true to the actual book. You can't compare something like Butcher and Blackbird or Haunting Adeline or Zodiac Academy to something like The Way of Kings or A Little Life, those types of books. It just, they are different books, and I think we have to treat them as so.
It's like the same thing with every TV show or movie. Like they're not all there to do the exact same thing. My biofic is not here to elicit the same reaction as Lord of the Rings. Like we're here for different reasons and I think that's really important. And like why there's such a wide variety of books in this room because I have different books for different things I'm feeling, what I want to get out of them, where I'm going. I will say all my books are about escapism in some way, shape, or form. I don't have any nonfiction in here that's not textbooks.
Yeah, but I think that that's such an interesting part of what we're doing here is experiencing those things so differently from each other, but also kind of learning to have a good time with them or take different things out of them.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to keep doing these because I think one book a month that is outside of my comfort zone is not a lot, especially when I'm reading 20 plus books a month.
Well, and we even talked about it last week a little bit where we do saturate our genres a little bit. You read like 5 serial killer romances in
Yep.
1 month, and that can be really overwhelming, or it can also really promote that form of escapism that we're talking about, where you just get over and over into the same things, and it does pull you out of it a little bit sometimes.
And I'm so much of a mood reader that like I'll just keep reading in the same mood I'm in until I exhaust myself, which I did and ended up rating Serial Killer Romance super low, although I stand by that rating because looking at Goodreads, I wasn't the only one.
So 3 out of 5 stars for Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. A little bit lower than I rated Butcher and Blackbird, but I think a very successful first month of Get Swapped.
I agree. And for record, my 3-star rating is like it was a good book. I might not like I wouldn't recommend it to everybody I know, but I might recommend it to some people. And I enjoyed myself and I didn't hate the entire experience. So
Yeah, and I had some problems with that book too. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It's by no means one of my favorite ones, but I also thought that it would have the most amount of interesting aspects for you. So I'm glad I kind of hit
yeah, no,
hit.
you definitely did. Like I related to a lot of pieces of that, and I had like Sam's quote even made me tear up a little bit because I was like, yeah, that sounds about right.
I am kind of excited to recommend some books that we hate for each other
Oh yeah.
because I think those will be just as entertaining for us. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Get Swapped. You can find us basically anywhere you get your podcasts: Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Apple. And you can also find us on TikTok and Instagram. I am Haylee Johnson with a fancy little underscore at the end.
And I'm Daria Can Read on TikTok, Instagram, and Goodreads.
Oh, yeah, I have Goodreads too. I usually update that. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next week on Whimsically Wicked.
Bye.